Hello, everyone. Today I'm very excited to be taking a look at Red Dead Redemption on iPhone and iPad. We're going to be having a look at the performance and also somewhat comparing it to PS5 and also a little bit of Switch. So let's get to it. Up first is my iPad Pro 11-inch with M4 and 16 gig of RAM. Red Dead Redemption on this device offers two graphics modes: fidelity at 30 FPS and performance at 60 FPS. The devices shown on screen support these options, though performance mode may vary across different models. I'm still unsure about the M2 iPad Pro as I don't have that one to test. Sorry. On the M4, the game runs flawlessly at the maximum resolution scale when using performance mode for 60 FPS. It looks like the game renders at a lower internal resolution with this mode, paired with FXAA for anti-aliasing. For this game, the Metal HUD always reports the final back buffer resolution on the majority of devices, not the internal render resolution, if that makes sense. So adjusting the in-game resolution scale won't change what the HUD displays. So even at 100% resolution, I almost guarantee it's not actually running at full native res. Regardless, the frame rate holds a solid 60 FPS throughout gameplay, and the Metal HUD's frame interval graph stays perfectly flat with no micro stuttering. It seems only the M4 and M5 iPad Pro have support for 60 FPS with this mode, likely because their GPU frame times stay below 16 milliseconds.
What's the matter? Ain't got the stand for a real fight?
Fidelity mode locks the game to 30 FPS and looks to run at a higher output resolution. The game looks great in this mode, but I really wish Double 11, who are the developer of this port, would raise the FPS up to 40 for this mode on newer iPad Pros. The jump from 30 to 40 is huge, and the M4's GPU frame time in fidelity mode sits around 30 milliseconds, which lines up with what's needed for a 40 FPS target. For me, I'll stick with performance mode on this device at 60 FPS, as it looks fine and feels smooth. The game also almost never compiles shaders at runtime, which has a positive effect on gameplay. Based on my testing, this is the same across the board with shader compilation on all iPhone and iPads. I wanted to see how the game compared to the newly updated PS5 version. It's not a completely fair comparison, considering the PS5 is rendering at 4K 60 FPS with HDR, but it's still interesting. For the most part, the game is surprisingly comparable. The main differences are that on iPhone and iPad, as I said earlier, the game uses FXAA, so aliasing is more noticeable, and there's no HDR support. Even so, the difference in a lot of scenes is very small. The core artwork, materials, shadows, and lighting are essentially identical between both versions. The biggest changes show up in fine detail. The PS5's higher native 4K resolution is awesome, and it obviously also has a much better anti-aliasing solution, with cleaner edges and far less shimmering on foliage, fences, and character clothing. In fact, it's not that noticeable at all. Moving on to my iPhone 17 Pro Max and iPhone 15 Pro. Performance mode on iPhone 15 Pro, 16 Pro, and 17 Pro only targets 40 FPS rather than 60. I was hoping these devices would hit a full 60 FPS, but I suspect Double Even capped it at 40 for two reasons. First, to prevent thermal throttling. Even though Red Dead Redemption is a 2010 game, running it at high settings on a phone at 60 FPS is still a heavy workload, and even the improved cooling on the iPhone 17 Pro might not eliminate uh, all of the sustained heat buildup for 60 FPS. Locking to 40 FPS keeps temperature more manageable, I suppose, while still feeling dramatically smoother than 30 FPS. And honestly, most users will think it's running at 60. I've seen plenty of comments online from people saying exactly that. The second reason is GPU performance. To reach a true 60 FPS target, you'd need GPU frame times to be around 16 milliseconds, and the iPhones simply don't reach that at 100% resolution scale. To test this, I manually dropped the resolution scale on my 17 Pro Max until it finally provided 16 milliseconds, and that was at a value of 2. Image quality becomes extremely soft and blocky and yuck, but GPU frame times do fall around 16 milliseconds, meaning the hardware could technically hit 60 FPS if it was uncapped in this state. But at such a low resolution, I just don't think it's worth it, and so in this case, the cap of 40 makes sense. Also, note the game sometimes reports a thermal state of fair as well, so even at 40 FPS, the phones do get hot. Fidelity mode on these phones has no issues hitting a stable 30 FPS at 100% resolution. It also appears to run at a higher output resolution. The image quality in this mode is very solid, but personally, same as my M4 iPad Pro, I still prefer the smoother feel of 40 FPS. Even if it's maybe not quite as sharp, I think it's running at a lower resolution. I also want to point out how it's interesting that the iPhone 15 Pro compared to the iPad mini with A17 Pro, they both have the same chip, but the iPad mini does not have support for 40 FPS. It runs at 30. And I think this is simply down to the iPad mini having a lower GPU count. Okay, now it's time to look at my iPad Pro 11-inch with 16 gig of RAM and my iPad Air 13-inch with M3. This is an interesting test because neither device supports fidelity or performance mode. They simply run at a locked 30 FPS. The image quality is very clean, aside from some typical shimmer on fine edges. The M1 iPad Pro could likely pull off 60 FPS even at 100% resolution in game, as the GPU frame time is frequently below 16 milliseconds. My guess is that Double 11 capped it at 30 to avoid thermal throttling over longer sessions. Still, I would love to see a proper performance mode added in the future, if it's possible, even for a 40 FPS target. The M3 iPad Air tells a somewhat different story. Its GPU frame time is noticeably higher at 100% resolution, but that's likely because it is driving a much larger native display resolution than the 11-inch M1 iPad Pro. I was able to force the GPU frame time under 16 ms by dropping the resolution scale to 6, but obviously the image quality is sacrificed. It is actually a little surprising for me that this new M3 iPad Air doesn't support 40 FPS or 60 FPS at all for this mode, because I really think it should. Alright, just a quick look at the game running on an older device. This is the iPhone 12 Pro. This gives us a good example of the game running on old hardware. It only runs at 30 FPS, but honestly, that's completely fine for this phone. The good news is that even the A14 chip handles the game fine. There is a bit more pop-in and the aliasing is more noticeable, but overall, it's solid. One interesting thing is that the metal HUD doesn't show the device's native 2532 by 1170 resolution like it does on newer devices. Instead, it reports 1869 by 864. That is possibly happening because the developer decided to render it into a lower resolution back buffer on an older device like this to maintain 30 FPS. And the metal HUD always shows that render resolution rather than the screen's full native resolution. Also, I just don't really know. And it also doesn't really matter. Even so, it's impressive how much of the visual quality is still preserved here. Let's quickly compare the iPhone 12 Pro to the original Nintendo Switch version. The Switch version renders at 1080p and 30 FPS, while the iPhone 12 Pro, obviously it renders at 864p, based on what the Metal HUD showed us. Visually, both versions share, I guess, the same core visuals and effects, but the iPhone has noticeably less foliage density in some areas, and it shows more aliasing. The Switch is also using FXAA for anti-aliasing, and the iPhone version seems to rely on obviously the same method, though the lower internal resolution on this device makes the shimmering more obvious. But at the end of the day, completely fine. Also, big thank you to my friend Quaggle for letting me borrow their copy of Red Dead Redemption on Switch. P.S. Quaggle, I'm better than you in a 1v1 in Fortnite. All right, and that's it. Red Dead Redemption on iPhone and iPad. I think this port is, for the most part, fine. I think it's just, it is a little bit confusing on what devices support 60 FPS or 40 FPS or whatnot. So I think some better communication from Rockstar could be added maybe to the App Store description for that. I also had quite a few things that I'd like to see with this port that Rockstar could add, or Double 11 if that they also worked on it. I've written some stuff down. I call it my wish list. So the first thing, and this is the most important, some devices right now are completely broken, like my iPhone XR and iPad Pro with A12Z. The game's unplayable. It's got these massive graphical issues. I don't know what's going on there. So you got to fix that because I know the Netflix version is free. So yeah, but if you go and buy the paid version, I think some people are going to be extremely disappointed when they boot up the game and this is happening. So if these devices aren't supported, I think it would be prudent to put that on the App Store description because that doesn't exist. It does list under the compatibility section that the game requires A12 and later, but maybe that's not true. So I think, I don't know, just I think that needs to be worked on. I would like to see HDR added to this port. Probably a lot of you won't really care, but I think HDR is quite important. There's not many games on mobile, I believe, that support HDR outside all of the Resident Evil games. So it would be cool if this one had it. It's just a small thing. Now, this is probably one of the biggest things. Where the heck is the Mac version? What's going on? Originally, I thought this was due to the game being a Netflix exclusive, but it turns out the game is also available as a standalone app. So in that case, I would love to see the standalone version be available on the Mac App Store or Steam. I really don't see a reason why it's not there. Apart from maybe like business, like you don't see a profit from porting it to Mac, but I really don't think it's that difficult to port it to Mac. You've already got a working PC version. All you've got to do is update the Metal framework for Mac, and you've already done that for mobile. Just port it over. I mean, if at worst, go into Xcode and just enable the iPad version to be playable on Mac. I'd even take that. I don't think there's an excuse for no Mac version. It's stupid. The game already runs great on Mac through the crossover program, so that is evidence that it could work here. So stop what you're doing, stop being stupid, and port it over to Mac because it's stupid and it makes me sad. Makes me sad. Also, possibly it would be cool if you could look into porting the game to Apple TV. Apple TV is a very underrated gaming platform. The game could possibly work on the latest Apple TV with A15. I think it meets the requirements with 4 gig of RAM and the A15 chip. I put up some B-roll here of the game running on my iPhone SE 3rd gen, which also has A15. It's not the best comparison because the display is only 720p, but yeah, and also I guess porting it just to one Apple TV is not a very good. It is a very good business idea in some ways. So maybe that's why they haven't ported it. And also, it just most people don't consider Apple TV as a gaming platform, but it's still something that I would appreciate. It would be cool. I just think we could see more games on Apple TV because it packs a lot more power than people think. It's just the RAM limitations is what gets in the way. Okay, next, it's good to see that obviously the game has controller support. I think that was guaranteed from the get go. But I would also like to see controller rumble support because that's not there. It's obviously a feature on PC and console, and obviously there are APIs that support that on mobile. So it would be cool if that was added, and also maybe mouse and keyboard support on iPad. That's also a thing that's possible. That would be really cool. And last of all, I would love to see if you're interested, Rockstar, GTA 4 on mobile or GTA 5 on mobile in the future. That would be a dream come true.